Welcome to Unmute Yourself, the podcast. I'm Nancy Medoff, author, speaker, and coach.
And I'm Beth Knaus, creative copywriter and the owner of That's a Spade Copywriting Services. We are done being polite and ready to get real about confidence, boundaries, and self-respect, both personally and in the workplace.
Beth and I first met when we collaborated on the best-selling communication handbook for women, Unmute Yourself and Speak Up to Stand Out. Now we are amplifying our message and taking it on the road with Unmute Yourself, the podcast. Warning, there may be, no, who are we kidding, will be some adult content. We have a bullshit button and we're not afraid to use it.
So buckle up, buttercups, because here we go.
Hey girl, hey.
Hey girl, hey.
I laugh every time we do that. I think it's so funny. You think everybody else thinks it's as funny as we do?
You know what? It's a little too late for that, isn't it?
It is indeed. So we're going to jump right in because, as I just mentioned everybody to Beth when we were talking about this episode, I'm super pumped for this episode because body language and how you show up legitimately changed my life and changed the trajectory of my career and continues to do that. So I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about why how you are physically showing up makes a difference. We talked about maybe calling this episode Size Matters. And I think it's a fun way, yes, it's a little edgy, but it's a fun way to get it in people's heads and to get them to remember when they're presenting, when they're in a meeting, even when they're just sitting at their own desk, that size matters and how much space you take up matters. What do you think, Beth?
I agree. And I think the space you take up, if you can picture yourself as filling that space you're taking up with your energy, right? And I think sometimes when people are nervous about speaking or having a conversation, the first thing they want to do is kind of close up, right? Bring their hands in close, cross their arms, cross their legs, like in a protective way. And really, that's not serving anybody. Whereas if you have a more comfortable stance or a wider stance or seat or whatever, you're letting your energy out a little bit. And I feel like that's better.
I love the energy connection. That's awesome. I've never thought of it that way. So that's a great segue to how this changed my life. So we may as well call this the Amy Cuddy homage episode. Amy Cuddy, for those of you who may not know, is a social psychologist. She actually lives in Newton, Massachusetts, my hometown. During the pandemic, I went to pick up some takeout and hers was right next to mine. And I might've stalked her a little bit, waiting for her to pick it up. But anyway, she has probably one of the most widely watched TED Talks, and it's called, I can't believe I just forgot what it's called. Just Google Amy Cuddy TED Talk. Over 65 million views. And I remember I watched this many, many years ago, and basically what she says is physically taking up more space, or power posing, she calls it power posing, impacts outcomes. And she did a lot of scientific research around it. It has since then been questioned, and that's probably another episode for us as to why people choose to try to tear down other people's work. But anyway, it has since been questioned. However, it doesn't matter. So the book that she's written, at least one book, her TED Talk, 65 million views. A lot of the data they found was there to support that. The more space you take up, the better outcomes you will have. And she proposes that and demonstrates that in her TED Talk through different people posing different ways. So anyway, the reason why I'm giving all of this background is because I tried this, and I tried this in a meeting. I can't remember if this made it in the book. It might not have. I tried this in a meeting. I remember I was in a meeting at the Marriott in Quincy, Massachusetts. And it was I don't know, probably 15 or 20 people at the meeting. It was right after I had read her book and watched her TED Talk. And I walked into the meeting and I sat down and I took up space. I wasn't a slob, but I took up space. I spread my documents out in front of me neatly. I sat up tall. I spread my, I sat back in my chair and I took up space. And I have to tell you, The most senior person in that room deferred to me the entire meeting. I will never forget it. Every time they looked over at me, I just commanded that meeting and I was like giddy. I couldn't even believe it. I'm like, wow, this really works. So perhaps it was my energy, to your point, or just taking up the space, but it works.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And again, this is definitely something you have to learn and you have to put into practice and may not feel so fabulous the first time, although actually maybe it does. And I think that's what it is that once you get the result, then you're like, I can't believe I waited so long to do this thing. It's such a small shift, but I can do it. And I think when you do take up space, you look confident and you look balanced and you look relaxed and organized. Whereas if you go in and again, your arms are crossed and you're leaning on the desk and you have one pile of papers and you're kind of crunched up in this defensive ball, you don't give off that sense of reliance or confidence that somebody would want to rely on you in a meeting.
It's interesting, people often say to me, well, you just exude confidence, which I take as a compliment. I don't always have the confidence. Sometimes I do. A lot of the times I do. But if I'm about to give a speech, I am nervous before every speech, every single speech. And we've talked about this. And as a matter of fact, I had a big speech about a month ago. And I walked around my hotel room, jumping up and down, waving my arms, changing my state, as Tony Robbins likes to say. And because I know that it works. And I know that if I'm nervous about giving a presentation, I have done this. I remember I did this my first big keynote. I was in Las Vegas. I walked into the bathroom. I walked into the stall and I did the Wonder Woman power pose, which is where you stand, with your feet spread and your arms on your hips and you just take up space in that bathroom stall. And it psychologically changed my energy and got me into the state of mind I needed to be in. And I was able to walk on stage with confidence. It's really interesting because what you brought up too was that oftentimes we'll shrink down and we'll make ourselves smaller subconsciously, not even knowing we're doing it. Like if you think about when you're waiting for a job interview, or when you used to wait for a job interview in a lobby, I don't know if anybody even does that anymore. You kind of sit in the chair and your legs are crossed and your hands are folded neatly on your lap, and you're twirling your hair and you're just sitting there shrinking. Whereas you should and can, and perhaps this is one of the calls to action, sit up straight, uncross your legs, put your hands on your lap equally rather than folding them, step up, go to the washroom, walk around, wave your hands, whatever you need to do to kind of shift that energy.
Yeah, I agree. I also think when you're sitting like that, you have a tendency to look around and compare yourself to other people. Like, that person looks smarter than me. Their briefcase is nicer than mine. You know what I mean? Like everything. And instead of maybe just smiling at people, or, what can you do to like shift those self-destructive things that you might be doing?
Yeah, I think we totally agree on that. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about conversation gender bias, which will be another episode, and when women in particular are interrupted and aggressively interrupted, right? And I see it a lot. They're aggressively interrupted and they kind of make themselves smaller, like they kind of jerk back a little bit and kind of slump or slouch. Whereas what I recommend is, if it's happening and if you're giving a speech, if you want to take a step back, that's fine, but make it a big, overpronounced step back so that it's a subliminal, oh, clearly you need the floor. I had the floor. I'm going to take a step back and give you the floor. And then you can be damn sure that I'm going to step back in and take that floor back versus, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if anybody noticed when Kamala Harris was repeatedly interrupted during the vice presidential debates. And I don't know if anybody noticed her body language. The first time she was interrupted, she was very kind. She was very gracious. Excuse me, I'm speaking, smile on her face, hands down, great. Second time she was interrupted, She was a little more physically aggressive. I think she put a finger up, or she did like kind of a little like, hey, hang on just a second. I'm speaking. And then the third time she did it, she full on put her hand out and put her hand to him, physically saying, stop. She didn't say stop, but she said the same thing. Excuse me, I'm speaking. And that was what stopped him. That third time is when he stopped. He didn't do it again after that.
Yeah.
So it took her really claiming her space to stop that interruption.
Yes.
And I would argue that the physical manifestation of stop is what stopped him.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a side note, but kind of connected to this, because I think you have to be comfortable also in what you're wearing, right? To be comfortable in how you place yourself physically. Like, I know for me, I'm just not a skirt wearer. I'm not a suit wearer. I did not grow up in that environment. I don't want to wear stiletto heels. Like, there's always this joke, like, I like a nice thick heel or a wedge, because if I have to flee a scene, I want to know that I can run. Like, and I want to be comfortable. I don't worry about uncomfortable undergarments and stuff, because then I'm thinking about that, and it's a distraction instead of thinking about how am I speaking or how am I presenting myself. And, you know, my husband and I used to joke all the time. I used to go to do presentations, and sometimes I'd have to go to these pretty difficult groups, and my boss would send me because I could deal with them. But at the same time, I also had to feel like, we used to call it Donna Draper. I was pulling the Donna Draper, like
Oh, I
Donna.
love it.
And yeah, so I had like specific pants and things that I knew were power clothes, right? And I worked every time. And then I would feel good, and then I could, kind of own the presentation and what was going on. And it's really interesting, because then people see it, right? They see it in how you're acting and what you're wearing and how you show up as a whole for them, I think.
I love that. So power clothes in addition to the power pose.
Yes.
Wow, I really like that. And it's interesting because you would think that would be a given. But even to this day, like before I have a speaking engagement, I'll try on all these different outfits and I'll ask Danny, which ones do you like? Blah, blah, blah. And we'll often disagree. Like, he'll like one, but I feel self-conscious in it. And I'll be like, nope, I'm going to go with the other one. I'm going to go with the other one that I know. For me, it's a pantsuit. To your point, it's a pantsuit. It's a pantsuit with my big platform heels. And that's really, yeah.
I think
It's a really good point.
Yeah. The one thing I'll throw in here maybe as a resource, of course, always the Unmute Yourself book, because we definitely talk about that sort of stuff.
Right.
But I actually love The Alter Ego by Todd Herman, where he talks about like getting into that mindset of that person you are when you're in that successful speaking spot, or whatever it is that you're doing. What is that alter ego? And he talks about it's not a separate thing. It's part of you. How do you turn it on? What do you need to do? Is it the clothes you wear? Is it what you say before? Is it that you're, power positioning? What is it that you're doing to kind of take on that persona who gives a successful speech or, presentation? Or that was a good book.
I'm totally going to check that out. And that brings me back to Tony Robbins, who is my total hero. He does a lot of, so before a big speech, if I'm nervous, I will turn on YouTube and I will watch him. He does this routine. It's a breathing routine. And, you're either into that or you're not. And it works for him, and that's great. But he also, he has a trampoline that he brings backstage. He has a mini trampoline, and he will jump up and down on that trampoline. I don't have a trampoline, but like I mentioned, I will jump up and down in my hotel room if I need to. And to your point about the alter ego, I know that I'm the one that's going to go crush it. It's tapping into, how do I bring that person to the forefront? And how do I not let everything else that happened on my way there, or what's happening at home, or what's happening, with my family, or whatever the case may be, how do I tune all that out and only tap into Power Nancy, gonna crush it, gonna rock it, needs all the energy, and take all of that energy and just make it into a ball of fire. And part of how I do that is to physically jump up and down, like Tony taught me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so hearing you talk about breathing, I think that we should not skip right over breathing, because I think that's a huge part of the physical language. And I don't know if you've ever seen me do this, but if I feel myself get short of breath, or I feel myself wanting to pull in that way to close in my body, oftentimes I'll put my hand on my chest. And because I know I can slow my breathing that way, because I'm a meditator, I meditate almost every morning. And I breathe during the day when I feel myself, out of whack. But it also kind of just puts me in the moment and reminds me of like, yeah, I'm nervous about something, but I'm also excited. So knowing the type of nervous that you're feeling, you can say, I don't want to be uptight about this. I want to be excited, right? Again, back to that kind of energy thing, is I want to give off this excited energy. And oftentimes for me, if I'm in front of a crowd, I'm also moving. Like, I don't necessarily stand in one space. I like to be able to move back and forth. I stand often when we record these podcasts, because it's just comfortable for me. So you have to find those things out about yourself, right? Which ones help you get the most comfortable.
It's interesting because yes, you do stand. You also move when we're Zooming. You move around a lot. I notice that. Like it doesn't bother me, but I notice that. I'm like, wow, she like is always moving, which is really cool. I love that you brought up the breath too, because it's so interesting. Like maybe 20 years ago, I went to this one particular yoga class where I really learned, I think it's called Ujjayi breath. It's where you breathe through your nose and out through, breathe through your mouth and out through like the back of your throat and your nose. I don't even consciously do it. And sometimes when I can feel myself breathing that way, that's how I know I'm stressed. And I automatically change my breathing to accommodate for the fact that I'm feeling some kind of stress or tension. And when I see that I'm breathing, I'm like, oh, you're stressed about this or whatever. And that is an awareness that forces me to kind of tune into what's happening. And it's really interesting because I subconsciously do it. I don't know why, but I do. And it's really helpful. It's really helpful, particularly when I'm having an argument with someone, which I try not to do. Like of course you're going to disagree with someone, but you can either be right or you can be happy. And that's a whole nother episode, right? What's your gain here? Choose peace, as you know, which are my 2 words for this rest of 2022. But I feel it, and it's a little check for me. And interestingly enough, that Ujjayi breath does not happen before I'm speaking. It's because I don't know why. Actually, it's interesting, but it happens when I'm stressed out, which is super interesting. Right. I think it's interesting. Yeah.
Right. Cool.
We cover a lot of things.
Yeah, we covered a lot.
We started with size matters, and then we kind of went to power posing, and then we went to your energy. I love the energy piece that you brought into it. I think that's really very, very spot on. What do you think about what do you think about as a call to action?
Wow.
I know what I want. Can I do mine first?
Yes, do yours.
Okay. I think that what I would like to recommend people do is the next time you are nervous about either an interview, a speech, a client call, anything, take up space. Take up space and then see how much it impacts the outcome of that conversation or situation. That's what I would say. That's what I would like the call to action to be.
So I'm going to follow that up with, make sure you really feel good in how you look and what you're wearing. If there's a piece of jewelry, for the longest time, I'd wear my father's watch, right? Because I'm wearing like a man's watch. I'd be like, I'm going in as Donna Draper. I got my power watch. Or, don't do that thing where you're like, well, I kind of like this. It's a little tight, or I feel self-conscious. No,
don't wear it. No,
don't do it. Make sure you go in feeling like you look like a rock star, and you're going to sound like a rock star.
Because you are a rock star.
You are a flippin' rock star.
Oh, you almost went there.
I almost did. I think I cursed earlier in this episode.
You did, but that's cool. It was a mild one. And we warned people. There's a
sometimes the passion overtakes me.
There's a warning. I'm going to bring out the BS button on our next episode.
Woohoo! I can't wait.
Woohoo! So I think that was good. I think we covered a lot. For those of you that are listening, we'd love to hear what you think. Shoot us a note. We tell you all the ways to reach us in just a minute. And until then, bye, girl, bye. That's a wrap on another episode of Unmute Yourself, the podcast. We hope you found value in today's podcast. We hope you were able to take a little time for yourself and perhaps think about how you're showing up.
And thank you for all of the great feedback we've been receiving. We'd love to hear more from you about what you think, the tactics you're using every day to speak up, and anything else you'd like to hear about on future episodes of Unmute Yourself, the podcast. You can contact us through our websites. Nancy can be found at nancymedoff.com, and Beth can be found at that'saspade.com. Or you can email us at unmuteyourselfthepodcast, all one word, @gmail.com.
We will see you next week, and until then, keep speaking up.